With President Trump set to touch down in Texas again today, we're just learning more than 100,000 homeowners in the state are expected to file federal flood insurance claims. Some already are finding out they don't have enough coverage. That's why someone here says it's time to privatize the market. Are they right or wrong? Hi, everybody. I'm David Asden. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus to find out with Elizabeth McDonald, Rich Karlgaard, Carrie Sheffield, John Tamney, and Bruce Japsen. So, Rich, folks against privatization say insurers would just skip right by the big flood zones like southern Texas. What do you say to that?
Well, no, I think the big insurance companies, the private insurance companies, would price in the risk. If there was money to be made by pricing in risk higher, they would do it. And so this is what we need, because it is kind of ridiculous that all of the American taxpayers should be on the hook for national flood insurance, as tragic as this situation is. Look, the all-time record for a flood payout by the federal government was $20 billion. Hurricane Andrew in 1992, that was a Cat 5 hurricane. Had it hit Miami, there are estimates it would have been $200 billion. That's a lot even for our federal government to absorb.
It is. And Bruce, already the National Flood Insurance Program is $23 billion in debt. This storm could make it go up another $10 to $15 billion in debt. There doesn't seem to be any end to it.
Well, here's the problem with private insurance managing big risks and so forth. They're only good at it until they're not. I mean, you could look at that in other industries, whether it be AIG and financial or health insurance companies that did well in the first 2 years of Obamacare, and then they didn't. They weren't able to manage it, and then they got out. And so if you have private insurance companies and they start to lose a little money like the government is, they'll just bail out and they'll leave everybody holding the bag.
I'm not so sure. The bottom line here is just simple mathematics, John Tamney. The program does not charge rates high enough to offset the costs, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. No one would ever knowingly build in a place where they thought they were going to lose their house in a flood. No amount of insurance would make that worth it. But the big thing here is that market signals matter. They're valuable. If the private sector were pricing the insurance, they'd say, well, if you want to build here, it's going to cost you more, given historical flooding patterns. Here would be safer. And so people would be the ultimate beneficiaries because they'd be most likely to build where they're least likely to be flooded. I'll just point out one thing. Houston is not historically a flood zone, and that's why correct. Most people didn't get insurance.
Well, and EMAC, frankly, that is one of the distinguishing features of this storm, is that it did not happen in a historic flood zone. It shocked the hell out of people. If there is a need for national flood insurance, maybe this is the one place where it really is need.
Well, you know, this is such a contentious debate. By the way, did I just hear Bruce Japsen finally admit that Obamacare is failing? No, I'm kidding.
No, I did not. No.
Just teasing.
Hey,
a little levity.
For United Healthcare and Aetna, but the Centene, they're doing fine.
All right, this is my time, not yours.
Okay,
just kidding.
go.
So, you know, here's the thing, what we're hearing from local reports, is that developers went in and fought and said, we're going to develop here in these low-lying coastal areas. When the officials tried to put these flood gauges in, the real estate developers ripped them out. So people didn't even know the zones that they were in that could be prone to flooding. That's the issue. I agree with Rich Karlgaard. I think you need to have market forces in here to price it correctly for insurance for these areas. And you know what? By the way, our hearts go out to the victims and the families who are so hard hit by Harvey right now.
And Carrie, what we're looking at on the right side of the screen right now are before and after shots. I mean, it's extraordinary to witness. And frankly, if you were in an area where in your lifetime and in your grandfather's lifetime hadn't been flooded like this, where you see the changes, these homes that everybody thought were safe but clearly weren't, how would private insurers do better than a federal program?
Well, no, it's absolutely heartbreaking what's happening, and we wish the best for everyone. But EMAC is absolutely right, as always, that there was a distortion here. The fact that people didn't have, there was information asymmetry. People didn't have the ability to make a fully informed decision. I also have to say, those 100,000 people, they're probably going to get a rude awakening when they see the bureaucracy and the paperwork that is going to go into these claims. There are all kinds of federal strings that are being tied, anything you could imagine, from, requiring labor unions to expensive to rebuild. Certain just demographics have to be. It's a nightmare in terms of trying to use the government as a means to protect against this. So that's just more evidence for the need for the private insurance. That's what we need.
Well, Rich, let me go back to the point that this is a generational thing. This hasn't happened as far as we know. Our records of flooding go back about 100 years in some of these areas, and nobody's seen anything in that span of time. On the other hand, Texas is ranked third as the third riskiest state in the union for floods. So do you just designate the whole area of southern Texas a flood zone?
Well, you know, in 1935, there was a hurricane, and Houston had more flooding downtown than it had this time. I think this one was spread throughout the area to a much greater degree. And, of course, it's a very large population base now because it's been one of the outlier high-performing cities in the U.S. economy of late. But we have to, I know this is, emotions are running high and people are suffering, but at some point we have to introduce this idea of private insurance so risks are properly priced.
Bruce, incentives do matter, don't they?
Well, sure, but here's the deal. If you're going to do that, you're going to have everybody buy a policy. And we've seen that with car insurance and health care and everything. And people, you guys like people to have the option of whether to buy it or not. And if you don't have everybody in the pool, it's not going to work.
John, what about the fact that this is an area that nobody expected to see floods? There was an example that Rich just gave us of an occurrence of flooding in Houston, but the swath was so wide that it went far beyond what are considered flood zones.
Well, I think it gets back to the basic truth that there was no information asymmetry here. The stories that you keep hearing from Houston is that people actually brought up, should we buy flood insurance? And history dictated that you didn't necessarily need to. And so I think one way to look at this is that this is another opportunity for the private sector to do what it does so well, is providing insurance for what is catastrophic or once in a lifetime. This would be obviously very cheap, and it's something precisely because this has happened in Houston that people will look more closely at. Government can't do this. The private sector can do it very well.
John, I'm from Utah, and people do have flooded basements in the middle of the desert. So I think that you need to give everyone all sorts of information to avoid information asymmetry. The other thing is that I think we need to bake in pricing into the pricing of building. That's where it should be, not just in the insurance. We need to have higher prices if you're going to build to begin with. The
end of September is when Congress takes up the issue as to whether to renew funding for this program. As I mentioned, it's already $23 billion in debt. That's a lot of money, but I look at these pictures coming out of Texas, and I think it's a slam dunk. They're going to get more money, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and it's going to be more hurricanes, by the way, or in hurricane season in September. I don't see Congress backing off that.
Okay.